I've played a lot of new games this year. Phantom Liberty for Cyberpunk, Armored Core 6, Fuga, Melodies of Steel 2, Shadows of Doubt, Baldur's Gate 3, Tekken 8, Atomic Heart, and I've crossed some others off my bucket list from years prior, such as Bloodstained Ritual of the Night, and a couple others as well. Amongst all these games, one stood out to me, not because it was the longest, not because it has the best graphics, not because it even has the best voice acting. In fact, the qualities listed here doesn't really do the best of any of these things, Robert Belgrade aside. But you know what? This is an indie game that punches above its weight and exceeds in a lot of ways I think other games will struggle to emulate. The game that chronically took inspiration from Castlevania, King's Field, and so many other fan favorites, it unironically ended up being the model for what I think other studios should look for in a blueprint when it comes to dungeon crawlers and adjacent genres. Developed by indie developer Akuma Kira, this is my review of Lunacid. I'm writing this review on Halloween night since I have no other plans of my own and have peeped an interview conducted by Brendan Hess, whose video I'll link in the description. Akuma Kira said they'd hope people would finish it before Halloween ends, so I decided that I would do that. Spoilers, this game is amazing, and I felt real spooky finishing this one out. Speaking of spooky, Lunacid drips in atmosphere. From the start menu to the final cutscene, every area seemed to have a vision that was guided into being a primordial horror fantasy ranging from cinematic classics, Castlevania, which is more or less an adaptation of those early horror films, Dark Souls, and Lovecraftian horror as well. Not all is dark and gloomy though. A fair bit of the game is comically whimsical between having cutesy devil waifus and Vivi's twin with music ranging from a variety of EDM, almost a noir-style shoegaze, chimes, piano, pipes, harps, and other strings, jazz and funk music as well. There's a pretty large variety of sonic bangers in this game. I feel like Kira definitely has her fingerprint on the musical score. I mean, of course they do. They did most of the music, along with some contributions from other artists, but the transitions that are made even within single tracks are just so goddamn funky fresh. Just about the only thing missing from these ensembles was a really aggressive pull of metal music, like what we've seen in other games, such as The Last Spell or Ultra Kill. The music in this video is going to be taken right from the OST, and if you want to find more music akin to what you'll find here, Rabbit Hole on YouTube has a lot of similar stuff. I'll try to link something in the description for that as well. Really, if there's any negative thing to say about the soundtrack, it's with how out of place it feels in certain areas, but I don't think that's a big deal since the music itself is very good. I would have liked to have seen something akin to a White Ward with some chiptune or something, since woodwind and brass instrumentations are clearly no stranger to what we get in Lunacid already. But this is more of a personal appeal to my taste, and I feel like it's also kind of in fashion as well with some of these indie titles. One of the other things I really enjoy about this game is just how well designed the world felt. I'm not just talking about what rooms connect to what hallways, the variety of X, Y, and Z axes. I'm talking about the flow, the secrets, the mystique, how there's no room wasted and everything has something going on. It does all of this without feeling cluttered, it does all of this while feeling natural to move through, and it does all of this in a way that draws your attention to really interesting looking things without distracting you from what you're really here to do. If you watch my video on Elden Ring and why I think the open world is actually a detriment to an otherwise really amazing game, Lunacid polishes up on why brevity is so important for a tailored experience, and this feels like it is. There are tastefully placed intermission and rest areas, there is a choice of enemy placement that can catch you off guard from time to time without being grating, the variability in going up and down floors that makes spaces you're traveling feel really alive and satisfying, some rudimentary platforming, and some funny puzzles that require spells or clever foot placement to overcome. It's hard to say what feels amazing. Is amazing jumping up and down over how well done these subtle design choices are, or is amazing characterized by the feeling that things are where they're supposed to be, you never have to think about it, and the impression of "this sucks" never crosses your mind. To me, part of game design is concerned with the functionality of how the space is played in. How will it lead to you without being overt? And in that way, the natural reaction should be one of subterfuge and not noticing at all. The fact that the design is as subtle as it is, in my mind, is what makes it amazing. So we've talked about some of the other major aspects of the game, but how's the combat? Not gonna lie, the combat is pretty basic. That's not to say that it's not without its nuances or isn't fun, because it is, but you are more or less relegated to just hitting things while backstepping or side-strafing while shooting magic and kiting. I can't say this is surprising. Lunacid is developed by a single person, and coding combat is sophisticated, and in a first-person dungeon crawler it's difficult to expect conventions of the genre being broken under the constraint of these logistics, in addition to being a genre that is kind of difficult to break from the mold, even with big budgets, if creativity is impoverished. That's not to say that creativity is bankrupt here, since clearly experimentation is at the forefront in other areas of the game. I just mean to say that having a lot of these combat systems in place is difficult even for big companies to get right when they have the resources to do so, and still fail from time to time. The expectations for a single-person project should be realistic, and the combat is engaging enough where I never felt like I was bored fighting enemies or didn't get excited over new weapons, new enemies, and bosses as well. There are some other first-person games with parry systems, dashing, bunny hopping, grappling, and a host of other mechanics that Lunacid lacks, but regardless of the simplicity, it still somehow feels fun and makes good use of its stat system. You have all the basic stats that you'd expect in an RPG game, but the one that really catches my eye is the speed stat. Unlike a lot of other games, where you can't really gain enough speed to make it relevant in combat, speed in Lunacid is a combat stat. Much of the game you'll be encountering enemies in corridors and hallways, and being able to shimmy out of range to go back in and poke is very viable. Additionally, certain enemies later in the game will have weak spots exposed only during very small windows and done sparingly. If you have high speed, you'll be able to mitigate that just by strafing around them and hitting weak spots. There are also two bosses who have entirely different new ways to fight them with high speed builds. The best thing about this stat is that it's the most important stat for speedrunning, allows you to exploit certain puzzles or get into otherwise inaccessible areas without certain spells or items. This, in many ways, makes it the best stat in the game, but not in the way that's obvious without proper exploration and an attention to detail. As far as the rest of combat is concerned, enemies have very relevant weaknesses and resistance, as well as compute immunity in some instances to certain spell types, travel quickly enough to make your defense, strength, and resistance stats relevant for a melee build. Debuffs and status effects, I feel, are extremely powerful and make certain items very valuable with increased difficulty. I think this last part about item value is very important to me personally, because oftentimes I feel like in action-centric games, items tend to feel like a waste of game design. I love making comparisons from one game to another, so I'm going to make one right here, but this is one of my favorite aspects about the Legends of Dragoon. You have no native healing there, and the only access to healing is with certain characters when you transform into your Dragoon state, which is a character install, or with items. And it is a game design choice that feels really good and separates it from other RPGs and increases the difficulty in a way that doesn't feel manufactured or artificial. Lunacid isn't on this level. You do have a healing spell that heals very slowly over time, which is useful outside of combat, but the healing items are very potent, and the anti-status potions are equally important if you choose to play on a higher difficulty. The slows are oppressive, and the blind status ailment in particular are very powerful. It clearly understands when combat is a numbers game and when it's a matter of player agency, and makes the numbers game enjoyable for a guy who usually doesn't like stat checks. As far as the story goes, it's pretty brief but has some bits that you read through in journals. The major premise is good enough to make you curious about the world it takes place in, and has enough mystique that makes me hope for a second game that can more thoroughly explore these ideas. To actually speak about the story, it's quite similar to the last spell. Everything is post-apocalyptic, humans learn magic to fend off the terrors of the world, the dead walk, and they are subsequently forced to throw their dead into this hole to quarantine. Oh, and criminals too. That's us. A lot of the things you find throughout your journey are remnants from those who survive their fall and wander looking for an escape. Religions develop as the survivors are cut off from the outside world, personal journals are found detailing the grief and regret of their situation, and some other things happen that lean into spoiler territory that I'll leave there. You're not going to spend time racking your brain over the smaller details over what this all means. It's all pretty upfront and usually is confined to just several lore entries about characters who are at one point in time in the same situation you find yourself in. And that's fine for what the game is, but if you're looking for some life-changing narrative, you're not going to find it here. What you will find are the beautiful areas the story takes place in, and peeking into the world that used to exist within areas you explore, several characters that create some sort of intrigue, and have somewhat satisfying stories, if not for morbid curiosity, and creatures who may or may not have their own lore. I wouldn't look too deep into it, but it's fun for what it is, and the official release of the game offers several endings as well as vague and esoteric lore during the endgame. That should be fun for you Dark Souls enjoyers. Overall, I really enjoyed Lunacid. There's a ton of stuff I still need to do that I won't spoil, but it deserves some time in the sun. The game overall has a lot of secrets, one of the best soundtracks I've ever heard in a video game, an unforgettable atmosphere, characters who are charming enough that I care about instances where I see them, even if they don't really have a lot going on, and the combat is good enough that for a $14 game, I can't really complain, and I really enjoyed it anyway. The design is overall just really well done and something I'd recommend people, and in fact I've already recommended several friends to play it, and it's one that I recommend to anyone watching this video as well. In fact, Lunacid came into my Steam library during a time when a friend and I were exchanging games for each other, and this is one that he recommended. If you can get around to it, support an indie dev who has made several other projects now, and I promise you're bound to enjoy this game. Speaking of support, subscribe, and watching my videos helps as well. I enjoy comments, and have a good one. See ya.